Hello, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, hey, hello, my name is Megan. We do crafty things here. So if you like crafty things, right now it's the summer, predominantly we're doing friendship bracelet stuff, but that will change come the cooler months, which are coming so close. Winter is coming. But if you like crafty things, please consider subscribing. If you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for subscribing and tuning in to another video. So today's video is actually going to be kind of a more casual video. I did one of these before and it was like top 10 bracelet questions. And I don't know, it was fun for me to film, so I thought I would film another one with just common questions I see showing up in the forums and like the chats all the time about bracelets, and or like even in my message boxes and stuff like that. So I thought I would just make a video. We're gonna make a bracelet, or I'm gonna make a bracelet, and I'm just gonna answer bracelet questions. So I'm just cutting some string here. I think I want something simple because I don't want to sit here and try and read a pattern while I'm chatting with you guys. So I think I'm going to make a double diamonds and X's bracelet. I think that's what I'm gonna do. Why not? So this time I've got like 11 questions, and they aren't really in any particular order, like the most asked to the least asked sort of thing. I just kind of found a bunch of questions and laid them out in a way I thought kind of made sense, so they segued into each other a bit. So I'm going to finish cutting my string, and then I'm gonna start making my bracelet here. Okay. So the first question I have wrote down here, and I see this all the time in the forums, and I see this all the time showing up in the chat, and it is, what kind of thread or string should I use and where do I get it? So typically I feel like most friendship bracelet knotters use embroidery floss. That's what I use. There are different strings you can get. There is like craft thread, which is very, very similar, but it's actually like I don't want to call it a braided cord, but it's twisted. And personally, for the tension that I knot at, it tends to snap for me. But I know different people have different success with it. I know Masha knots enjoys it and has used it in a lot of her bracelets. I also just don't like the finish of it. I feel like you lose a lot of your kind of satiny finish when you knot with that. But again, a lot of your string comes down to personal preference. So I prefer embroidery floss. The embroidery floss I've had good luck with is actually most embroidery floss. Prism is decent and it's cheap, but if you want a really nice shiny finish, and like really good quality, DMC is kind of like top dog. I also like a J&P Coats. That's actually normally when you buy single packs of embroidery thread, like the single skeins, you generally are buying like DMC singles, and the Walmart here actually sells a brand called J&P Coats as their singles, and I actually really like that. And I've also had good luck with a brand called Anchor before as well. So those are kind of the brands that I lean to: DMC, J&P Coats, Anchor, and Prism. But there's lots of string out there, and I've heard a lot of people saying that they're getting good string off of Amazon for a good price. For me, generally I'll buy a large pack from Walmart and or Michael's, but any craft store or sewing store will sell embroidery floss. Whether or not they sell it by large packs, that's the question. but they will definitely sell it in small like skeins, like little packets like this. They're generally like 50 cents each. So you can hand pick your colors, or like I said, you can buy large packs generally at Walmart for cheap. Now, personal preference, it comes down to the finishes you like. Some people use yarn for their bracelets. Some people use wax cord for their bracelets. Some people use craft thread, like I said. It all comes down to personal preference, and a lot of it will probably have to do with whatever kind of string you started learning with. So I started with embroidery thread. So that is what I like to use. But it's a lot of personal preference. You'll just have to try the different strings and see what you like. I can't tell you what you like. You have to figure it out yourself sometimes. But I can tell you what I like, and if you like that too, that's awesome. So the next question I have here is, how do you best use color changing thread? So that skein I just showed you was a color changing thread, and if you guys popped in to my last alpha tutorial, you'll see that I used a color changing thread there. Now personally, color changing thread isn't really my thing. I don't really like it, simply because, I don't know, when I pick my color combination, I want it to look like what it's going to look like. I don't like my strings changing midway through the pattern. It doesn't have anything to do with like it being difficult to knot or anything. I generally don't like the way it looks. Now, to be fair, most of the color changing string I've used is like this monochromatic stuff that goes from like light purple to dark purple, or, you know, light green to dark green sort of thing. I haven't really used any like sunset or tie-dye color changing string. And personally, when I see bracelets made with it, I don't think they're as cool as everyone else, I guess. So when I use color changing thread, if I use it, I'll generally use it in a alpha pattern as like a background, like I did for this bracelet. This is the last alpha tutorial I did, so I'll leave a link in the cards as well. But that's what I would personally recommend. But again, like if you look at Masha, she likes to use it in normal patterns, generally to fill in like a section, because she likes seeing how the same shape can show up and look different with the different colors coming through it. And that's cool too. It's personal taste and what your aesthetic is, and it's just not something I've personally worked with a lot. But that moves right into the third question, and it's how do you work with glitter string or metallic string? And it's a little bit tricky. It's a lot more coarse, so you will find that it rubs your fingers a lot more, but the main problem people have with it is that it frays very easily, because it's generally not like a soft cotton like your normal embroidery thread. So like a soft cotton or a wool will the fibers will kind of stick to each other, so you don't get a lot of that fraying that you do with a metallic string. And the metallic string is just because it's a lot of the times the glitter stuff has more of a like tinsel texture to it. And I mean, that just doesn't have fibers on it to attach to anything else. So I've heard a few tricks. Generally, I just deal with it and try to like keep it together. But I've heard some people will tie a tiny knot like in the very end of their string down here when they're working with metallic string, and that's just to keep it from fraying. which I think would definitely work. I've also seen some people take their embroidery thread and just a regular like metallic thread, like sewing thread, and add it into their embroidery floss. So it's like a subtle sparkle, and then I imagine you wouldn't get as bad of a fraying issue as you would with straight up metallic string. And some people will use actually like a lightweight metallic yarn, just because it's generally twisted up a lot more than an embroidery floss. So those are some options to consider when you're using glitter strings or metallic strings. The only string I've really ever had enough difficulty with that I was like, I am never buying this again, was I got a straight up satin embroidery floss once, and it just like wouldn't hold the knot because it was actual like satin. It just, the knot wouldn't hold. It would just like slip apart and become a giant half-tied knot. So that was the only string that I really struggled with. I tried to use it in a pattern, a golden snitch pattern, like a Harry Potter golden snitch pattern, and it was a nightmare. I never finished the bracelet. I just called it quits and made a different craft altogether. So that's the only thing I would recommend is if you're going to, if you want that satiny finish, try and find like a satin cotton embroidery floss. Straight up satin, I think personally I have had great difficulty with, and wouldn't recommend it. The next question I have also has to do a little bit with threads, but now we're getting more into bracelet making. And that question is, what do you do with alpha strings if your color changes are on the edge? And this has to do with like when you're done your bracelet, if you had a color change on the edge and you trim your string, you're gonna have like a little tuft sticking out the side because your color change was right on the edge. And what do you do with them? Because people, of course, try to cut it and put nail polish on it or glue on it, or the list goes on for what they try to put on it to try and like seal it in, and then they don't like the way it looks. So what I do, and I don't think I have any alphas on hand with this feature. So if I have an alpha with a color change on the edge, and now this one isn't one of those bracelets because obviously it has a border around the edge, but I grabbed this one because it is a good example of a bracelet that has a lot of color changes in it. So if I have a color change that happens on the edge out here, sorry, my hand is like creating a shadow. If I have a color change that happens on the edge out here and your string would therefore stick out the side, what I would do is when I trim all these strings back here, I would not trim that string, and I would pull it in towards the center and tie it under one of these color change loops where the string is carried across on the back. And I would tie that onto one of those strings. And I tied a couple times, but you don't want to tie it too much because then you get a bump. So sometimes, depending on the string I'm using, if it's like that satin thread where it was kind of wanting to undo, I might put a small dab of fabric glue or nail polish on it, and generally, like not a big dab, just a tiny dab, and that's generally enough that you're probably not going to feel it, and you've pulled that string in from the edge so you don't have a tuft on the side. And that is a question I've seen lately in the forums, like what do I do with a color change on the edge? And ideally, if your pattern doesn't call for it, try to avoid color changing on the edge because it can make things look a little bit wonky. So if it's possible, try and avoid it. But if your pattern goes right to the edge of your bracelet and there is a color change there, well, there's not really anything you can do about it. So that is the best solution I found. If you guys have another solution, let me know in the comments below. I'd be interested to see what you guys do with those strings that you have on the edge. The next question I get all the time is, how do you keep your edges straight? And I know this is a question that comes up all the time, especially from beginners, and honestly it comes up in like every string craft. How do you keep your stitches straight? How do you keep everything consistent? How do you keep your knots consistent? How do you keep your edges straight? How do you do that? And I don't know, I guess I learned string crafts kind of an old school way, and I was always taught, if you're working a string craft and you are having inconsistency issues where your stitches aren't the same size or your edges are wobbly, it is not something that you grab a tool or a quick fix for. You adjust your tension and do better next time. So for me, when I get messages of people saying, oh, your alpha edges are so straight, like how do you do that? I don't have an actual technical answer. Because for me, like I said, I was always taught when I was little and learning how to crochet and how to knit, that's all tension. Like I don't block my knitting either. I had never heard of blocking your knitting. To me, you just knit properly and it looks fine. Like, and I know that sounds bad because it sounds like I'm trying to shade people who do that. And no, like it's definitely, it's a useful thing. I have no qualms with people using it. That's just my experience is not, like I don't have any tricks to keeping a straight edge. It's a lot of practice. Like I've been making bracelets for 14 years. When you get to that point, if you're still having, when you get to that point, you are probably not having issues with your edges not being straight. You've probably already ironed out your tension and it's probably not an issue you're having. So a lot of it comes down to your tension. Now, I know some people will say, but there is a technique, Masha Knots has shown it, and yes, there is technically techniques to get straight edges or straighter edges, but I've never used them. I know Masha Knots has videos on them. I don't have experience with it. I never even, like, literally, I was always so driven with string crafts and told that it has to do with your tension that it never crossed my mind to even think that there would be a technique to make the edges of my bracelet straighter. Like that just, when I saw that was a thing, and I saw that from Masha, I was blown away. I was like, wait, what? What? No. So for me personally, straight edges, I would tell you to practice with your tension and just practice. Like practice your core patterns. Like practice, make a billion candy stripes and a billion chevrons, because at the end of the day, like, yeah, it's cool to make all these patterns and stuff, but the bottom line is if you want your bracelets to look good, you have to have the different knots mastered. So make like bordered chevrons, something like that, where you can practice every kind of knot and make them until you're so sick of them that it's not even funny. And at that point, like that's a basic pattern. You will solve any tension issues and inconsistencies you have in just working those base patterns if you're really dedicated to it. But if you're looking for more of a quick fix or you're still having difficulties even after that, I would definitely, I can't recommend it because I've never used it, like I said, but I do know that Masha Knots has a tutorial on straight edges. And I would suggest, I guess, checking that out. I don't know, I can't speak for its effectiveness, but I do know it exists, and that people talk about it all the time. So to me, that doesn't solve the problem, but that's just my old school handcraft soul coming out, I guess. Yeah, a lot of it comes down to practice, though, guys. Like, if your knots aren't consistent, I don't think a straight edge technique is going to solve all of your issues. Yeah, so I would recommend practice, and if you want to try different techniques, go ahead and try a straight edge technique. But I have never used one, so I can't speak to how well they work. Sorry. The sixth question is, can you make other things with friendship bracelet patterns? You certainly can. Specifically, not so much, I mean, you can with a normal pattern, but more so with alphas, because alphas are literally just a graph pattern. So you can actually make lots of stuff with them. You can do crochet and crochet your patterns. You can do like wall hangings and do large chunks of string and knot. You could do that with a normal pattern as well. You can cross stitch the patterns. Basically any craft that uses a graph pattern to base off of, latch hook, embroidery, like cross stitch, perler beads. There's all kinds of things you can make with friendship bracelet patterns. Like I said, very specifically alphas you can do a lot of stuff with. But like when you're in grade school, grade 8, I was making friendship bracelets all the time, and my teacher was like, how cool would it be if you just got like yarn and made a big scarf like that? And so that's what I did. I gave it to him for Christmas. My teacher got a bordered chevron scarf in the colors of his favorite football team, which he had posters of all over the classroom. So he loved it, but let me tell you, it was very frustrating to make because it was like, I don't know, I put together like 8-9 pieces of yarn to make up one string, and it became such a tangled mess. It was terrible. But it did turn out pretty cool, so I can't really complain. And question number 7 is, what are the best patterns for beginners? Best patterns for beginners are kind of your core patterns, and everyone will say this. I would start with candy stripes, chevrons. Honestly, the core patterns I learned were candy stripes, chevrons, and then the diamonds and X's pattern. And I say that because a lot of friendship bracelet patterns are based off of those core starter patterns. So that is where I would suggest everyone start. And like I said, if you want to perfect your knots and get your knots really even and consistent and your edges straight, I made those patterns because if you watched my last video, I learned before YouTube was a thing. So I learned from a book, and those were the only patterns in the book. And like, to my knowledge, that was the only book I knew of. And so those were the patterns. Like that was it. Those were friendship bracelet patterns. There was nothing else in the world. Those were all the friendship bracelet patterns. And so I made those patterns for years. Different colors. I tried different things. Like, I'm doubling up a diamonds and X's pattern here for you guys. So I do that. I double up chevrons, double up bordered chevrons, double up diamonds and X's. Sometimes I'd like triple them up. I'd make chevron bracelets with like 12 colors, ridiculous stuff like that. Like, I would just make those patterns in every way that I could conceivably think of until, honestly, until we moved and my mom finally got internet again. And then I was like, I'm gonna Google friendship bracelets, and found out that there was more patterns in the world. But the only site that I could find, I believe at the time, was called like Heather's Friendship Bracelets or something like that. So that was where I started learning. That was when I first learned how to make alpha bracelets. And that was like, whoa, this is a thing that can be done. So that was years ago. But those are the patterns I would suggest for all beginners to master. And I don't mean like make one and then, yep, I can do it. I mean like make them until you are so sick of them, it's not even funny. And those will hand right into segment knotting. I do have a segment knotting video coming. I filmed most of it, and I have lost somewhere one piece of file, so I might have to record it again, which actually irks me so freaking much. But it is what it is. But when it comes to segment knotting, there's a lot of questions about segment knotting, and honestly, that's where it starts. If you follow like YouTube tutorials on candy stripe bracelets, chevrons, and like the diamonds pattern, those are your core patterns. And if you're learning them off of YouTube, I can pretty near guarantee you're learning them in a segmented knotted fashion. And those are the core patterns you look for when you're segment knotting to segment knot larger normal bracelets. So master those patterns. Then the next question, of course, is what are the best patterns for an intermediate knotter? And at this point, it kind of gets weird because it depends on really how far you're willing to go to master those core patterns. For me, I had tied those core patterns for 3 or 4 years before I realized there was any other friendship bracelet patterns in the world. So for me, I was able to jump in and tie an alpha bracelet like no problem. So that was because, like I said though, I'd been knotting them already for 3 or 4 years. So I kind of I knew all the knots. And actually when I started knotting, I hated normal patterns because I couldn't figure out how to read the patterns. They were so confusing to me. And then when I did figure it out and get it down, I'd always get the strings all messed up because they're not like all attached in the same way. And I struggled a lot with learning patterns in a not segment knotted fashion. I didn't even know that segment knotting was called segment knotting. That was just how I learned to tie bracelets. So kind of weird, but intermediate patterns, it depends on how far you've mastered your knots and what you're considering intermediate. I would consider an intermediate knotter if you're brave enough to start trying alphas. I would recommend trying alphas because alphas are just forwards and backwards knots. Very rarely you can do a forwards backwards knot to bring in like a new knotting string or whatever. But typically it's all forwards, all backwards knots. So you're not working with any weird forwards, backwards, backwards, forwards sort of things there. So I would definitely recommend that. I would also recommend, I guess a beginner pattern too, like a fishbone chevron, because that's one that you can really practice your knots on. And other than that, it's up to you how adventurous you feel, because really, once you have the knots mastered, it's just patience and organization that you need to be able to knot the rest of bracelets. I would not suggest you jump into something that's like 40 strings wide. As soon as you master those core patterns, maybe try something a little bit smaller than that to start off with and just build yourself up. So I don't really have any specific patterns that I've ever made where I'm like, nope, this is like a great pattern for people who are just moving on from basics. Like, not really. So yeah, I would just say be realistic about your skill level. Like, know, like, okay, I have no difficulties tying candy stripes, chevrons, or like diamonds and X's. Okay, I'm going to try this. And yeah, I would suggest giving alphas a go. Alphas are kind of, honestly, I like making alphas more than anything. Alphas and just basic patterns. I still to this day, as you guys see in my wrap-ups and stuff, just make a lot of the basic patterns. So I just enjoy keeping my hands busy. The next question is, what are the best alphas to start with? And if you're just getting into alphas, definitely start with a two-tone alpha. So an alpha with just 2 colors. And try to find something where the words or pattern don't go right to the edge. So trying something like this, where we can see this pink does not go right to the edge. Try something like this where it's a basic pattern, or even better, I would start with letters. They're called alpha bracelets because it's short for alphabet. So I would suggest starting with a 2-tone bracelet with letters. Basic, simple, that's where I would start. And then if you're feeling comfortable after you've made like a couple name bracelets or whatever, you can start journeying into pictures. I have a tutorial on my channel here for a 2-tone alpha that's a little skeleton. I will link it in the cards in the description, so you guys can check that out if you want. But that is where I would start, and then gradually build up on the color changes. Start with like, then move to like a 3-color where there's 1 color introduced, and then kind of build your way up to wherever you feel comfortable. And if you find that it's easy to add in more colors and, you know, make the picture come out okay and your bracelet is smooth and stuff, then move up to as many colors as you want. I can't tell you definitively where you are or what you should try. But don't get discouraged if your first couple attempts don't turn out the way you want them to. That's the main thing, is if you're going to try it, just don't get discouraged, because there's so many bracelets that I started and threw out or cut the string off of and was just like, nope, this is not gonna work. So just keep that in mind while you're tying. Nobody started out tying perfect. What are your favorite patterns? I have said it 1,000,002 times, I feel like, but my favorite pattern that I've ever made is my ship bookmark. And I have it right here right now. And it's this one. This is my favorite pattern I think I have ever made. I also did a dark mark from like Harry Potter, a dark mark bracelet, which I really, really loved. And I have that bracelet somewhere still because I loved it so much. I didn't want to throw it out. And it was like really wide as well. I'll insert a picture of it. But I really loved that one too. And I think those are probably my 2 most favorite that I've made to date. I also, for whatever reason, really, really love this normal bracelet that I made this month. I'll find the pattern number for that and I'll post it in the description below if you guys are interested in it. But I don't know, there's a lot of patterns that I've made, and those are just the ones that stick out as favorites to me. Like that ship one, I adore that one. I think it turned out so, so good. So I'm quite happy with it. And how do you tie with long strings? There are a few different techniques for this. Some people, for bracelets, if they know they need like a solid background color and it's going to fill in a lot of the bracelet, they will keep it on a bobbin like this when they tie, and they'll just continue, like they'll leave it short and continue to unravel as they need the string. I find that's really cumbersome because if you guys have noticed, when I'm normally tying, I don't open my strings up that much. Whereas when I'm making a tutorial, I kind of exaggerate the sail shape and like the 4 shape. I don't normally tie like that. I think I'll do a couple knots here or there like that, but generally I'm making my loop pretty much big enough to get like my thumb in, and that's it. I have gone too far, I'm not paying attention. So to me that didn't work. Some people will also like butterfly their string, like wrap it around their fingers and make it into a little ball, I guess, of string. And again, that for me, that comes down to the same problem as the bobbin, is just that I find it slows me down and I find it cumbersome. So I will personally just cut my string as long as I feel comfortable working with it. And I will add more in if I need to add more. That's just how I work. I'd rather add more string in and be comfortable with how I'm knotting than knot a whole bracelet in a way that I'm not comfortable with. Because I've tried that before, and honestly, it ends with me giving up on the bracelet. So, or just taking forever to knot it because I'd rather make every other bracelet under the sun instead of that one. So that's how I deal with long string. Another popular question, and I will be making a video on this as well, someone asked me to, and that is how to start bracelets with double loops. Well, if you were paying attention, you saw me do it on this bracelet. It's not that difficult. You literally just put your loops side by side and knot your strings. If possible, I like to start mine with like a diamond and X's pattern goes into a chevron. So I'll start with the 2 chevrons, do a color pass, and then knot them together. But ultimately you just put your 2 loops side by side and start knotting. So is what it is. Otherwise, guys, I think that is all the questions I have down to answer. There we are. Anyways, guys, I hope you liked that video. If you have bracelet questions for another video or any questions at all for another video, let me know down below. And until next time, I will see you guys then. Bye.